Now going to have a bit of a discussion where we sort of explore different perspectives on parent-child communication. So can I ask our panelists to join me, please? They are from Corla Nanogue, Darius. He's a student. Irish Secondary Students Union representative Angelica Foley, and Anya Lynch, who's the CEO of the National Parent Council Primary. I should say we were supposed to be joined by May Fanning, who's the president of the National Parent Council Post-Primary. Unfortunately, May's unwell and not able to join us, so we'll field some of that to Anya. So maybe we might start off with a very simple introduction. Maybe Darius, you might tell me a little bit about yourself and your organisation. So what did Corla Nanogue do?
Hello, I'm Darius Conifal and I'm from Corla Nanogue. And Corla Nanogue is one of Ireland's main youth representative bodies. And I'm part of the national executive of Corla Nanogue. And through that, we work to ensure that youth voices are heard in politics and society.
And how do you do that? How do you?
We're elected every 2 years onto the national executive, and from that, we are given a mandate by the general voting population of Corla Nanogue, and this year's mandate was RSC.
Great.
And
okay.
That's led us here.
And so, how does that manifest itself then in your day-to-day at Corla Nanogue, Darius? You have this mandate to improve RSE. What does that mean? Do you meet with members of government or decision makers, policy makers? What does that look like?
Last year's Corla Nanogue National Executive worked on the youth travel card, and that's like a big change in terms of transport. And this year's we've been working on RSE, and obviously we've been meeting with professionals like our lovely panelists here.
Yeah. And
they've been telling us great information that we're feeding into government policy.
Great. Okay. Angelica, let's hear a little bit about the Irish Secondary Students Union. What do you do, and what's your role in it?
Of course. So my name's Angelica Foley, and I'm the Welfare Officer of the Irish Second Level Students Union. And now I know you may not be too familiar, we're only around about 15 years so far. The Irish Second Level Students Union is the national democratically elected student representatives for second level students in Ireland. So some of you may have heard of our colleagues USI. Think of us as the USI, but for second level. We have over 580 plus member student councils, so that's about 2/3 of the schools in Ireland that we represent, from all the way down in the grassroots, all the way up to the highest levels of government. We're trying to really push for student voice in policy and education.
And what does that look like?
So I suppose anything really. We have over 60 student officers, from Kerry to Donegal to myself down in Wicklow. And what we do is we consult with students, we consult with stakeholders, and we really push for student voice in our education system. So from talking to students on the ground in student councils to attending Oireachtas committees, that's really everything we do.
Amazing. Okay. And then Anya, at the National Parent Council, the primary, can you tell me a little bit about your work there, please?
Yeah, so we're the national stakeholder voice for parents in education, and recognised in the Education Act as that. So we do two things really. We provide services for parents and supports for parents, including helplining and training events, and then we're responsible for gathering the voice of parents on policy and legislative issues. Which we do through a range of ways. I suppose we have a helpline, so on a daily basis we're hearing the concerns that parents bring to us and the difficulties they might be experiencing, but we also do a wide range of consultation events. So we do surveys. With our surveys, we also in a lot of instances survey the children of the parents, so we hear the children's voice at primary as well. And then we have consultation events, where we have events like this, where we have a room full of parents sitting round tables, having discussions and giving their feedback on particular topics.
And what are the challenges in that role?
Well, I think when you say parent voice, it sounds homogenous, and everybody would know here that the parent voice isn't homogenous, and it's our role not to interpret that voice, but to represent it authentically. So that can be very difficult and challenging on particularly subjects like relationships and sexuality and other subjects. It can be very, very challenging for parents when they read our submissions or engage with what we're doing to make sure that they see their voice in what we represent. And I'm sure both of you have similar challenges to that, and particularly that minority voice, which is always important because we need to consider society as a whole. We can't forget minorities' voices, so we need to keep them part of the discussion. So that can be challenging.
It seems that this is such a hot topic at the moment, RSE, that everybody is talking about it. Any ideas why that is? Why it's become to the fore very recently, Darius?
Well, from my understanding is in the 90s, we've had our first RSE courses implemented in schools or implemented in healthcare settings. And from that, we've seen the benefits they show. The benefits such as being more able to express your feelings, being more confident in yourself. And that just leads into everywhere in life.
What do you think, Angelica? Why is it such a big thing at the moment? You open the papers, on the radio, everybody's talking about RSE.
Well, I think the first thing, and I would agree with Darius there about how since the 90s we've really seen this kind of huge push for RSE. But I suppose from our perspective, we're really seeing the push come not just, I suppose, as you're saying, from the front pages of the newspapers, but also from the students themselves. As Ireland is becoming a much more progressive country, we're often, I suppose, opening up to new ideas. And when it comes to RSE, we've learned so much and there's been so much research done in the past 20 or 30 years that our understanding of relationships and sexuality education has developed immensely.
Yeah, I mean, Onya, do you think it's because we're more educated, we're more open, that more questions are coming out? I mean, why do you think it's such a...
I mean, I think particularly at the moment we're looking at curriculum development around this area, so that will always bring it to the fore in terms of the conversations that people are having, and different, I suppose people have different views of that, so they want to make sure those views are heard. But I think just generally in society, there's a lot happening in terms of social media, online communications that generate discussions.
Yeah.
I think children and young people are in a much more challenging environment, and we have to remember that when we're talking about RSE, relationships is a key part of that starts right from birth. So these things are all becoming more complicated in life because young children are using internet, they're using, social media. So as they become more exposed to the general world, I think we have more and more challenges. So I think there's lots of reasons, and I think that I think you're right, we are moving on as a society in saying we can't not talk about these things anymore. So how do we have these conversations?
There was some work done by Kathleen Conlon and our UCD team, parents of 4 to 7 year olds, and many of those parents believe that the schools should be taking the lead when it comes to RSE. And I'm wondering, Darius, what's your thoughts? Is this something that you think the schools should be leading on, or do you think it's something that parents should be leading on?
My thoughts are it should be both. It shouldn't be just one. And the main thing about it would be that sometimes the parents would not be able to give their children the adequate and right and knowledgeable information around RSE. And schools need to be there to back up, or the other way, for schools to give the main information if parents are lacking.
That's a good point, actually. I hadn't thought about the fact that the sort of good pedagogy when it comes to sexual health and sexuality, the schools would have better instructions on it than many parents, and I suppose that's one of the reasons why we have these resources here this morning. What do you think, Angelica, is school a great place to be leading, or should this be supported in school, but really these conversations being had at home with the parents?
Yeah, I think I'm really on the same page with Darius about this. I think, as with many things, well, not a perfect analogy, when we think about our children when they're maybe just learning to talk, it's often the parents who help, and then when they go to school, that's when they learn more. They learn about how to write and read. I think when it comes to RC, it's much similar because, as Anya was saying earlier, when it comes to relationships, we too often kind of focus on the sexuality aspect here. But I think it's really important to realise that, relationships, they start from birth. They start when children are kind of learning their family dynamics. And I think it's really, really important that we don't just restrict that to school, but we also have parents involved, and we can't just solely rely on parents because everyone's home life will be different, and it's really important that students have knowledge and they have facts. So I think a bit of both is really the best of both worlds.
Anya?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both the previous comments, but I think it needs to go before schools. It needs to start in early years. When we talk about consent with teenagers, that starts from very early years behaviours and how young children treat each other and respect each other, and how families treat each other and respect each other. But I also think that between the early years or school, whichever way you want to go with it, it has to be a partnership. And you can only have a partnership if both partners know what each other are doing and they're supporting each other. And I think whereas a school and early years are very important in terms of that kind of factual piece, the home is around values and what the values of the home is. And that's a really important piece that parents can't and shouldn't even think of handing over to anybody else, because that's about what is really important to that family. So that partnership between school and early years and home, I think, is just critical to children having the right information, but in the right context as well.
Yeah, actually, and it's funny, my conversations in our home have been, sort of one-to-one, and actually I hadn't thought about. We sort of said, how did that go? When we're talking about, so we talked about this today or whatever, and how did that go? And it's usually, sort of a bit awkward, but okay. But actually, we haven't really talked too much about how we talk about it and what I think we're very similar, myself and my wife. So I think we probably come from the same place. But that's an interesting observation. So we know that parents play a unique role in this development of children, but it's not always easy to start that and to sort of weave it, I suppose, in an easy way through the development of a child. I do feel like I kind of feel like I'm sort of shoehorning it in every once in a while. It just doesn't help. What are the challenges that face children when they're trying to do this, to make it just a normal part of daily life or family life, to talk about these issues?
Yeah, well, I think, one of the things when you think about talking about these issues, as we call them, because we can't even really say it, is that we start from a very young age with children and call some body parts by their real names and other body parts by childish names.
Right.
That immediately puts a barrier for parents in trying to engage in this conversation in a real way later, because you've already said that actually there's something a little bit different about these body parts. So even saying like the real word like penis and vagina becomes like, oh my God, I've said it, and the child runs away because I can't hear that from my parent. It just feels too wrong. So it's how you set it up right from the beginning. And I think the resources here are really important, even just the title of them, make the small talk, make the big talk small talks, because that's the problem is, I think when our generation were growing up, certainly mine, it was one big talk and you just sat there and waited for it to be over.
Yeah.
And it was, it really was a lecture to you that had a questions and answers session at the end, but you usually ran out of the room by the time it came to the questions and answers session. So I think that is what parents today grew up with, and that's all they've got in their kind of toolkit to use then to have their... So these resources are just essential, because if you're, as a parent, saying, well, I don't want it to be like how I had my talk, so what else can I do? I think these resources give you a really, really clear pathway to make sure right from early ages you're having those small talks. It means that a big talk is never necessary, so you don't have to prepare yourself to sit down, have the awkward conversation and leave.
Yeah, very good. Very insightful. What about post-primary then? Is there a different set of challenges for secondary schools?
Yeah, I think that there really is, because I think the thing is, as children grow older and become young people and young adults, there's lots of things they don't want to talk to their parents about. So it's not just relationships and sexuality. There's many things, and it's very appropriate, and it's as you become independent. But I think one of the really important things is that if you as a parent don't talk to your children about relationships and sexuality or drugs or alcohol or any of those things, then you are basically saying to your child that they shouldn't talk to you about it either.
Yeah.
So if you have taboo subjects that you don't go near as a parent with your teenage child, then they won't come near you with them either. So it's important to go through that. And I suppose the other thing is, particularly as children get, right the way through, but particularly as children get older, you need to listen more than you talk. Because sometimes as parents, you just want to give the information to keep them safe. But actually the safest thing you can do for them is to listen where they're coming from and try and understand where they're at. And that's important for all age children, I think, but particularly as children become more and more independent and have more independent thoughts from their parents.
Yeah, it's funny, as you talk to us, I'm thinking about all of these things for myself as a parent and making little notes. Would you believe I gave myself a clap on the back because my youngest son complained to me this morning that Casper kicked him in the penis and not the willy. So that's where my head is at. But surely, Angelica, like, we all say it's great to have both, but actually, surely parents are the last people we want to talk to us about this. Is that not where young people are at, or does it really depend?
I really must say I do think it does depend, because I think, as Anya was saying there, you know, I think with children, especially with young people, as you're getting a little bit older, you're really good at picking up the tone of a conversation. And when it comes to anything, I suppose, to do with the big sex talk and parents, there's always that kind of air of embarrassment. There's always that stigma. And it's everywhere really in our society, from not being able to call a penis or a vagina. As young people are growing older, they kind of inherit that. And it makes it much more difficult. So if you're from a family who perhaps, as yourself was saying there, you know, from an early age, let children know, okay, that's your penis, that's okay, it's just a body part, no need to worry, compared to potentially a family where it can be a little bit more embarrassing or a stigma, then not only will the children feel uncomfortable when they're getting that big talk, which really should be smaller talks that happen throughout their lives, they'll also be really kind of embarrassed to go back and ask for questions when they need it. And I think that's a huge, huge issue.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think I'm probably a little bit guilty. So I'm bringing myself into this, I don't know why. It's not about me. But just as a parent's point of view, I sometimes change the mood a little bit, even when I say, so Casper, I want to talk to you about this now. Maybe that's just not the way to do it. Darius, what do you think? Are parents well positioned? I mean, is this what we want from our parents, even though we know it's the right thing?
Well, it all goes down to embarrassment, doesn't it? If your parent just walks into your room and starts madly talking about, let's talk about penises, vaginas.
It's tone. Tone is important, yeah.
Tone is important, and timing. But it's all about embarrassment, and that's what Angelica was talking about. The small talks are really important. It just builds up that honesty, that intimacy, that trust.
Yeah. A lot of the keywords we were getting this morning. So,
sorry, could I just come in there a little bit as well? I think the other thing is use the opportunities in life. Don't wait for a talk. Do you know, there's things happening on the radio, there's things happening on the television, there's all around us, as you know, social media. Use those as the launch pad for a conversation rather than just, I want to talk to you about something.
But on that, a lot of those stories can be quite negative. And, you know, when it comes to sexual abuse or rape, stories of incest or whatever it is, you know, those are the stories often that make the headlines, and those are the stories that, you know, when I hear, you know, I get very nervous about having to explain the really horrible side of life to my poor innocent children.
Yeah, and but the thing is, if they're hearing it and they've nowhere to talk to about that, then what's happening in their heads? So you don't want it to happen in their heads. You want to have it in a safe conversation with you.
Yeah.
But it's again going back to that: listen more than you talk. See where they're coming from. See the information they have and they understand first. Don't launch into explaining the adult version of what it is that you're seeing or hearing. But it's an opportunity to just ask, what did you hear? What do you think about that? What do you understand? And take it from there, rather than I've got to explain this to them now. You know, so I think it's
brilliant. Angelica, when we hear from parents, a lot of the time you get this line sort of, I tried, but they don't want to listen. You know, or I tried to have the conversation, but they just sort of shut me out. What would you say to that? Like, what would your thoughts be when you hear that?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, when it comes to your children, I think it's really important that not only do you just try once, but, you know, you keep talking about it. And as Anya was saying then, don't make it this big, scary thing. And especially when it comes to modern life, if your parents aren't going to talk about it and you have a question, what's to say they're not going to Google it and find out some horror story that way?
Yeah.
Because that's the reality of it with social media, and I suppose with the way teenagers and young people are, that they do talk. So it's really best that people have the knowledge, because otherwise you'll have all sorts of myths going around about things, and that's not really what you want for children. It's really important that they have the facts that their health is, taken care of.
Yeah, but so say, we're hoping that everyone in this room gets these resources, shares them, downloads them, and distributes them, so parents can have a better approach to it from the beginning. But what about parents now who just reading this book going, oh crap? What would you say to them? How do they start those conversations, do you think? Having looked at this and realizing I need to turn the boat in a completely opposite direction.
Yeah, well, I suppose for many of the parents reading this, they probably had a different experience themselves of getting this information. So it is a new thing for everybody. But I think the most important thing is just to be honest, and to be open, and to make sure that the young person in your life who's relying on you to find out all this information can trust you, and that when you're sitting down and you're talking to them about it, you're confident and you're not getting embarrassed, because that's not fun for the child or the parent. So I think when it comes to these sorts of things, just read it through, and just kind of think about how best you might want to approach this, because as a parent you will know your child better than anyone else, and I think you'll kind of know yourself how to talk to them in their own language.
Yeah. Anya, a lot of the time when we think about these talks, it often seems to be the mum involved. And recent ESRI research suggests very little has changed in the past couple of decades, which I think it might have. Dads seem to be kind of a bit absent from these sort of talks. Is that a bad thing? And do you think it's still mums doing this?
I think I think the research is very clear that it is still mums doing it. I mean, I think mums take the role around education generally, and this is part of that education, I suppose, role. I think it is a problem. I think, for a start, I think fathers and mothers come at relationships and sexuality from different experiences, as a male or a female, or from wherever they've experienced their own growing up with their sexuality and their relationships. And I think children should benefit from both of that understanding. But also, if you say it's the mother's role, you've basically cut the resources for a child by 50%. So if something happens and it's only the mom you talk to and the mom's not there, then the dad is definitely not anybody I go to, because I've never spoken to him about this before. So I think just on a very practical level, you're minimising the resources your child has. But I also think that the parents have different perspectives, they have different experiences themselves. And it's really important that dads have conversations with daughters and mothers have conversations with sons, and that it's not a gender conversation, it's a more fluid conversation.
Angelica, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I must say I really do agree. And when it comes to things that, if a child needs to ask a parent a question, why should they only have to ask one when they have two parents? It goes back, I suppose, to the values that you all were displaying on the Menti of being open with your children. And I think being able to talk to both parents is a really important cornerstone of that.
So sometimes we hear parents and many other adults are kind of out of touch with how young people operate and live their lives. And I'm wondering, if that's the case, what can parents do to better understand the lives of teenagers and adult children? And what can they get that they can't get from a website, from face-to-face conversations, Darius?
Well, the most important thing children can get from parents that they can't get from a website will be their honest stories, their personal stories, because those are the things they remember. Those are the things that they'll just, when they're in their situation that they're unsure about something, they'll just go back to those personal stories and just think, how would I do this better? And that's really important. And talking is how you get to those stories, and talking is how you understand children.
Yeah, my passion is communication, and I think you're absolutely right. Reading something generic and applicable to everybody on a website is one thing, reading resources but when you hear the specific words of someone's experiences told through a voice that you know and trust, it's very different in terms of how you treat that information and how applicable it is for you. You can visualize it much better if they talk about their own stories. What do you think, Anya?
Well, I mean, I think I absolutely agree. But listening again, I can't emphasize that more, but also the values that the parents bring and the family have. That's a particular context that child's grown up with and is really important in how they frame all of their relationships and sexuality conversations and experiences. So I think you can't get that not just from a website, but you also can't get that from chat groups and other kind of more interactive media as well. There's something within the home that you get, that trust that you've talked about, that relationship that's developed over many years. All of those are things that parents and other family members, I think we can't ignore, and I think it's all, somebody's already referred to it, is siblings, older brothers and sisters, cousins, grandparents. All of that is a mixture of support for children that's just really, really important.
There's sort of a lot to get through in these talks sometimes. And when I was flicking through the book, I was like, yeah, I've got to cover that. And then I saw the pages on sexual development and sexuality of girls, and I was like, well, I haven't got girls. And so I almost skipped back and I went, wait a second. And I'm wondering, like, is it important for us to be talking about what happens, with girls when it comes to puberty, periods, and so on with our children, at the same time as explaining what goes on with our boys? Anya?
I think if you want to raise understanding, empathetic young men, then absolutely. I mean, they can't just see things from their own perspective, and so I think absolutely it's important that they understand and are empathetic towards people who are experiencing relationship sexuality in a different way to them, whatever that different way is. So I think all of those conversations have to happen. And I say age appropriate, which I hate that term because what does it even mean? But I think that means for me that it's child-led, that the child is driving the level of the conversation from their questions and what they're hearing. But I think absolutely all of those kind of conversations have to happen.
Yeah, Angelica, those perspectives, did they come through when you were hearing about sexuality and sexual development? Were you hearing about all the things that boys go through as well? I suppose in a male-dominated world, probably that's more likely than men being taught about periods and so on.
Yeah, well, I suppose to go back to my own education, such a long time ago that was, I think, back last year, I think. When it comes to it, it was much more clinical, and you could really tell, even from our teachers, I suppose, that they were uncomfortable with those discussions. At home, I was actually my mum, I suppose, that did give me that big talk, but it's actually a book that I had to read, because I didn't want anything to do with it. So I think definitely a book like this would have probably been really, really helpful. But I think when it does come to, I suppose, things like, teaching young boys about what young girls will go through, that's really, really important, because we do live in this society that's really, unfortunately, horrible for young girls. For young girls growing up, there's a lot of toxic masculinity, there's a lot of misogyny in the world. And I think if we were to teach young boys about things like periods, about things like, I suppose, menstrual cramps, it would, and I suppose young girls conversely about the things boys go through, it would also help us develop a better society, because we'll have young men that will grow up to be better husbands, to be better fathers, and then when they grow up and they have their own children, they won't be afraid to give those small talks to their own children, because as the ESRI research is saying, it is mostly mothers at the moment, and that shouldn't really be the case, and I think that's a really good first step towards doing that.
Hear, hear. Fantastic. And
can I just say on that, I think we're making a lot of inroads into that, and I think organisations like Angelica's are making a huge inroad into it. And I say that because it's only just struck me. I was at a meeting recently, and one of your colleagues, a male colleague, was talking about period poverty. And to be honest with you, because that is new, hearing males talk about it, I was a bit taken aback, and I shouldn't have been. But I think being confronted by student unions like yourselves and them not having that gender-typical way of addressing things is really challenging all of us older people in the room to actually have those conversations better as well. So I think organisations like, the Call in a Note, the ICU, I think they're all helping us push us forward as well with our conversations.
Well, we'll have our panel back on at the end of the day to reflect on some of your comments from today, but Angelica, Anya and Darius, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that was very good, wasn't it? Okay, so as you know, we're here really to focus on parents and their role in these conversations, making big talks, small talks, as we've heard. But schools are obviously a major player in this marketplace of ideas. They offer a different environment for young people to have these conversations in a safe, facilitated space, and hear and discuss different perspectives on certain topics. So I want to hear now from Annette Honan, Education Officer with the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment. As you know, the NCCA is revising the full SPHE curriculum review process and the development of a new draft junior cycle SPHE short course curriculum, which will be finalised and published next year. She's also working on a new specification for the senior cycle, SPHE and RSE, and she'll now give us a brief overview on these developments, which will complement some of the work being done by parents in the home. Annette.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, everybody. That's a pretty hard act to follow, isn't it? And this sounds so boring by comparison. I was asked to talk about the progress and the processes that are in place in relation to developing the updated curriculum. And initially I thought, oh no, I won't talk about the processes because they really, who wants to know about the structures? But last Saturday I had the privilege of meeting with Darius and Corlin and Og for their national executive meeting. And most of that time they quizzed me about those processes. And they really interrogated me up and down and in and out. And they were very smart and very strategic in their questioning because they wisely recognised that in order to influence change, you need to know how it happens and where are the points of influence. So I suppose everybody in this room is interested in influencing change. So I'll share some of the same information that I shared with them, but obviously we had a more extensive conversation and quite a strategic one. And just the previous week to that, I met Angelica and her colleagues from the ISSU. And similarly, it was really interesting that they were asking questions, not just about how the curriculum gets developed, but also how we can influence its implementation. So we'll come to that in a moment. I was told to just press the green button and, and there we are, magic. So the NCCA was established as an independent statutory body under the Education Act of 1998. And our key role is to advise, is the term that's used in the bill, the Minister of the Day on all matters relating to curriculum and assessment. And that remit is from early childhood through to primary and upper secondary. So effectively what we do is we develop the curriculum and guidance in relation to assessment. And then when we have a new curriculum document ready, it goes to the Minister and she is, or he as the case may be, advised that it is now ready for implementation. Now, is this advice always taken? Yes. I'm not aware of any curriculum that was developed and a minister at that point said, no, thank you. Sometimes it doesn't get implemented as speedily as we might want it to. Now, in the instance of SPHE, which is currently under development, I don't think that's a real concern, to be honest with you, because there is a huge momentum behind this work. There is cross-party agreement. It's in the programme for government and that support for a new curriculum. So once we have the work done, I don't think it's going to sit in any government minister's desk for too long. So that's encouraging. Where should I be pointing this?
You don't need to point it.
No, and I'm pressing like mad here. Yeah, I'll leave it to you.
Well, do you want me to?
Wait, you can be... We'll just go like this. Magic it. So that's the structure then. The council comprises of 25 members who are all representatives of our partners in education. So we would have, I won't name them all, but they're on the website. You can look on NCCA, you'll see who exactly, and the names of the people are identified as well, and the representative bodies. So you'd have teachers' unions, the management bodies, the parents, National Parents Council, represent the ISSU is now in our council, which is great as well. So a whole range of partners sit at council, 25 members, and that is reflected and merged then in our boards. So if a piece of curriculum is being worked on, the board for early childhood and primary would consider the primary curriculum, junior cycle curriculum, the junior cycle board, and similarly with senior cycle. And then the real work happens at the specialist development groups. So in the case of SPHE, when the announcement was made that we were going to update the curriculum, a development group was formed, again representative of various stakeholders and experts around the table. We'd have quite a few teachers, we'd have the Department of Education Inspectorate, we have management representatives, school principals, and some subject experts in this area, obviously, as well. So they do the real work of deliberation and are informed also by external expert groups who might advise, and sometimes just critical friends who would have a particular perspective and a particular contribution to make, maybe to a specific aspect of the curriculum. So we might reach out to people who'd be experts in substance abuse or mental health or bullying or whatever that it might be that we're looking at a particular time. So, moving on then, there are structures, and all of this is informed by the way in which we work in the NCCA. See, it's not just me.
No, it's not you. You're like I'm in YMCA. There you go.
Great. So I mentioned that the deliberation, this piece of the jigsaw, that happens mainly at our development groups, at board and at council, where the work is really interrogated and discussed in some detail. But before it ever goes there, the work is very much grounded in research. And I heard Maeve mention how important that is to the work of the HSE as well. It has to be evidence-based. It has to be really grounded in the most up-to-date research, both at a national and at an international level. So that's brought into the frame and into the discussions at our deliberations and right throughout the process. And we're generating our own research in this area now as well, which is fantastic. You know, we have a huge body within Ireland that we can draw upon. The networking is really important too. In the NCCA, we frequently work through school networks, and in these networks, we'd be asking them to think about our ideas in advance of implementing them, to maybe gather examples of practice. And then there are other networks. I mean, networks such as our other agencies within the system, colleagues who work across other departments, that's all really important to us as well. And probably the most important piece of all, if I'm honest, is the consultation piece. And over the years, I think we've gotten a lot better at that, because it really is such a core part of our work, and it's a very meaningful part. So we go out twice. We go out at the outset, before we've even begin to sit down to develop a curriculum, we go out and we say, what do you think is needed? And who do we go to? We go to schools, and in schools we talk to the students themselves, we talk to teachers, school managers, and where possible we ask if we can speak with parents too. It's not always easy, parents are busy people, but we do ask, and on occasions we get to meet with parents too. And then we consult through bilateral meetings. We organise events like this, roundtable events. Many of you would have attended. And online, we have some survey tools that we would use, and they can be quite effective. To give you an example, in our last junior cycle consultation that just finished in October, 4,500 parents contributed online to that. So those consultation processes are really important, and we consider really, really carefully and read everything and look to see what now are we hearing from this that can help to improve the curriculum that we're working on at the time. So where are we now? So the progress made, I suppose, in this area. Many of you will know, Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind going ahead to the next one.
You have it.
Oh, I have it. Okay.
There if you finish it.
You're very good.
It should work.
It should. I was getting a little. I've gone click mad, is right. And the backwards one. The back. Oh, look, yeah, great, thank you. So many of you know that this process began in 2018 with the review of relationships and sexuality education. And out of that, then, a number of actions were identified. And one of those was the need for an updated, modern, comprehensive and integrated SPHE curriculum, of which RSE is an important part. So the work began then in identifying, well, where are we going to start? And junior cycle was the place where we began that work in terms of the curriculum development piece. But we also said, curriculum development takes time, especially because it is a collaborative process. And therefore, schools can't wait and teachers can't wait. We need to support them in the here and now. And to do that, we set up on the website, if you go to Curriculum Online, 3 toolkits for SPHE teachers, one for primary, one for junior cycle, another for senior cycle. And that's where teachers can go and find guidance and resources to support them in teaching, perhaps in a more progressive and a braver manner than they might otherwise, and to gain confidence in the classroom, even in relation to the current curriculum. And obviously that's going to be updated to ensure that it aligns with the updated curriculum as well, all of those supports. So that's just a screen grab there of that Curriculum Online toolkit. And just to mention as well, if any of you have suggestions for resources that could go into that toolkit and be useful for teachers, we'd always welcome them. Needless to say, the ones being launched today will be right up there tomorrow as well. So where we're at then now is the junior cycle curriculum went out for consultation in the summer, got quite a bit of media attention and quite a lot of great engagement and response. So we're analysing all of that data now and using that as the basis for finalising the junior cycle curriculum, which will be presented to the Minister in the springtime for her approval and for implementation then in schools in September of 2023. Very quick on the heels of that then will be coming the senior cycle, because we're already begun work on that, and would invite you to participate, in fact, in contributing your views. That's the last slide. But in the meantime, just before I just give you this website for how you can contribute to the senior cycle developments, because that consultation is open now, and to mention that will be implemented then in 2024, and primary work is also underway, just to let you know. No, that's fine. So my final point is, sorry these didn't quite align, but that's okay. Final point is a really important one, I think, in that all of this work, and we can have the most amazing, up-to-date, modern, comprehensive curriculum in the world, but there can be no curriculum development without professional development. So that's a really important area for work as well now at the moment, trying to work in a collaborative and supportive manner with colleagues in initial teacher education, in the support services. I see Bridget here today, which is great. You know, how that's the really important piece that's needed now, to support teachers in being confident and competent in taking forward bravely a new curriculum. And also the key thing that keeps coming back in all of our consultations is the fact that we can't do this without engagement and partnership with parents in a meaningful way. And the research backs that up, that the work we do in schools is way more effective when it's also supported by conversations at home. So again, I mentioned the toolkits, but this is going to be an area of our toolkits when we launch the new curriculum next year. We're going to ensure that there are supports there for teachers as well. And the resources today are an amazing support in that regard. So we're delighted that they are being produced. And all of the work that the HSC does through its work in supporting the whole SPHE curriculum, not just RESE, I'd really like to acknowledge it today, because they really are the leaders in this area. And those supports for teachers are just so, so important. So on that note, I'm going to stop. And if anybody'd like to question or comment in any way, there might be a couple of moments. I don't know, Jonathan, is that okay to offer that? Are we on time?
Absolutely, you're doing great. Any questions for Annette? You were comprehensive.
Sorry, I've probably just confused you all.
No, very good. Annette, thank you very much. Nicola and her colleague Owen Brennan brought together this really useful research summary looking at the value of parent-child communication about relationships and sexuality, the challenges and what the parents have said and what needs to happen to kind of overcome some of these. And what's really important to point out is that the ideas are not particularly new, the research is new, but what Nicola's done is sort of gone through all the technical research and made it much more digestible for ourselves and for those who are basically designing these resources. So, as Richard said at the beginning of the day, you know, these resources are evidence-based, and this is coming from a big wealth of evidence that really has been there for some time. But Nicola's work has been really just helping people parse that, and so we're going to hear from Nicola about that, and we'll launch the resources then. So, Nicola.
Hi everybody, it's great to be here. A friend of mine, her father was a lecturer in art history in a really dry topic, so every so often he would just say the word sex to kind of get the whole audience engaged. So I'm really looking forward to all of you guys being on the edge of your seat throughout this. Just to say, I have a slight cough and a cold, so apologies in advance if I'm hacking up a lung as well. So as Jonathan said, we're presenting the research summary, which was published today, and it was designed really to give everybody an overview of the literature on this topic, on parental communication, on relationships and sexuality. We've developed it to help parents and those working with young people. So I'll talk today a little bit about some of the international literature, but a lot of this has been actually commissioned by the Sexual Health Crisis Pregnancy Programme. Before I get into the lovely details and the fabulous research, I wanted to sort of start by contextualizing the life of the child. We know that children live in really intricate, frequently changing social environments. And I'm not going to get into all the gory details of this theory, but really it's to say that children live within a lot of intricate microsystems. So be that the intimate home environment, be that the school environment, their friendships, their communities, their neighbourhoods. And within all of that, of course, is the social environment, the politics, the economics, which is going to influence both the microenvironments and everything else. And these things change over time, so children's experiences can be both constant or they can be marked by change, be that their parents' employment status, their home address, their family structure. And I suppose I wanted to kind of point that out because today we're focusing on parents, but we're not undermining and we're not denying the influence of all of these other systems, which all are influential and all, of course, interact with each other. So as I've said, children live in this highly complex, richly social environment that's changing. And the environments are conveying messages, they're conveying norms, attitudes, values. And throughout this, young people are going through a process of sexual socialization. They're learning what's normal, what's not normal, what are acceptable feelings. They're learning about notions of masculinity, femininity, sexual desires, what's normal, feelings, roles, language, practices. And again, it's conveyed through their families, through their friends, through their communities. And culture generally is providing that set of rules. It's telling children with whom, where, when, how, and whom to have sex with. But I think, again, through all of that, as we've said already, parents are the first and the most influential educators in those early years. They're laying that foundation for learning. They're helping young people develop critical thinking skills. So technology is changing rapidly, probably more so in the last 5 to 10 years. But if children have those critical thinking skills as a base, they're able to question some of the societal norms, some of the behaviours that they may be exposed to. So we'll get into the theory, or into the research. Hold on. So the first question is, where do children get their information from? And I know you've heard about the SRI study. It was led by Professor Smith, Emer Smith and Anne Nolan at the SRI. But it was a longitudinal study. I think that's key. So it's really, really powerful. It's tracking the same group of children over time. It's the Growing Up in Ireland data. And they asked children, where are you looking? Where are you getting your information from? And they were asked at both the age of 13 and the age of 17. And I think, and I hope this graph is really exciting, but if you see on the left-hand side, the left-hand bar, these are 13-year-olds, and the majority of them are saying that they're getting their information from their family, from their friends, and only 23% are saying, from their friends. By the time they get to the age of 13, it's almost entirely flipped. So 17% are quoting their family as their main source of information, but 46% are getting it from their friends. And when the researchers drilled down into some of the characteristics here, so they looked at, for instance, family background, and they asked, did this influence responses in any way? And there was very little variation by family background, except to say that young people from lower income families were more likely to be in that top bracket, to say that they're not getting information from anywhere. The other interesting outcome here was that those people who had a close relationship with their mother were much more likely to be sourcing their information from their family. So these relationships, the communities, the social pathways through which young people are receiving this information are shifting and they're changing. And I think it's really helpful for parents to kind of understand this as a sort of dynamic process. And there's a window of opportunity here. So if these conversations are happening early, before the age of 13, you're probably getting into the psyche of the young person in a way that you might not be as they age into adolescence and beyond. So why are parents important? Well, as we've already said, they are their children's earliest educators. They know their children best. They're observing family interactions all the time, and this is going to profoundly affect their development. The parent-child relationship is meaningful, it is profound, and it will probably influence that person through their entire lifespan. And we know that educators and healthcare professionals are really, really important here, but they probably will only have an episodic kind of interaction as opposed to that constancy that a parent can provide. They're able to offer individualized support, so we know that they can match their child's age, their cognitive development, their wider social environment. But I think it's worth thinking about the kind of non-specific effects here. So it's not just that you're getting really useful information about sexual health. You're building that affection, you're building a child's self-esteem, you're producing a supportive environment. Again, those critical thinking skills can be developed. But really you're allowing children space in which to express their thoughts, to share their experiences, and really importantly to ask those questions. So I want to touch on the hard science, the future health benefits of these kind of conversations. But before I do, I think it's worth making sort of 2 points. We know that the earlier the age of intercourse of a young person, it's associated with a feeling of lowered competency or lowered readiness. And that's associated with a kind of whole host of other things, like maybe not being ready or able to plan contraception. And that may be associated with poor outcomes like unplanned pregnancy, earlier childbearing, maybe higher rates of STIs, non-volitional sex, and of course, these can have quite long-term and serious effects on health and well-being. But secondly, and I think more positively, that ESRI study found that those young people who had got to the age of 17, only 33% of them had initiated sexual intercourse. So if they were older, if they were 18, 38% of them had initiated sexual intercourse. If they were 16, only 32%. So that means that 2/3 of young people in Ireland, by the time they get to the age of 17, have not initiated sexual intercourse, which I think is probably quite a positive finding. So the literature tells us that mother-daughter relationships that are empathetic, that are warm, and that are open will be helpful and they're conducive to these kinds of conversations. But one great study that was conducted in the US, it was again a longitudinal study. They tracked children over 10 years, so lots of money, lots of time, lots of resources in doing this kind of work. They conducted the study in a pediatrician's office, and they tracked lots of different things in young people. So they were interested in their risk behavior, their relationship with alcohol, with drugs. And they also looked at the kind of quality of the relationship that they had with their family, but also with their siblings and their wider network. And they compared those young people who had initiated sexual intercourse with those young people who hadn't. And what they found was that if a young person reported that they had a good quality relationship with their parents, they were much less likely to have initiated sexual intercourse. So that tells us good quality communication delays early intercourse. So the ESRI study that I mentioned also gives us really good, robust evidence to show that young people who had had a conversation with their parents at the age of 13 were much more likely to use contraception when they did decide to have sexual intercourse later on. And finally, the third study that I want to really highlight is the fact this was a meta-analysis. This is a search of 52 papers, so they're taking in a lot of information. They were sampling adolescents under the age of 18. They found conclusively pretty much that parent-adolescent sexual communication was associated with safer sex behavior. And it was a really strong finding. So it didn't matter whether the study was longitudinal, so I was tracking over time, whether it was at one point in time. It didn't matter whether they were interested in condom use or contraception use. What mattered was the communication, and it was irrespective of the study design or any of the outcomes. But they also reported that mothers played, in particular, a very protective role in predicting the safer sex behaviour, and the protective effect was more pronounced for girls than for boys. So we know it's difficult. We know that it's not necessarily an easy conversation, and we have some good qualitative information from Dr. Catherine Conlon, who talked to mothers age 9, parents of children age 4 to 9. And she asked them, like, why is it difficult for you to have this conversation? And the results, I suppose some of them are self-explanatory, but they are interesting. So parents simply don't want to frighten their children. A lot of parents expressed how telling their children about how their body might change as well as sort of what's involved in reproduction and sexual intimacy, would potentially frighten them. And a lot of people described how their own experiences growing up of sexual education was in itself quite frightening. And women in particular mentioned menstruation as something that could be alarming for a young girl, and they recall themselves being quite frightened and not prepared for that experience. Children will worry, parents worry that their children will pass this information on to others who might not necessarily be ready for that information. And I think there's a sense that you'll be judged by your children's parents. They worry that their children might change how they'll view them once they learn about sexual intimacy. And they worry about compromising their children's innocence. So a lot of parents attributed a naivety and innocence to their children, and they talked about their children's belief in sort of magical concepts like the tooth fairy, like Santa Claus, and many described how understanding sexuality would potentially lose that innocence. Innocence might be prematurely lost. And simply parents felt embarrassed. And I know that's been discussed earlier. But again, I think it's important to know embarrassment is a reciprocal feeling. Children pick this up. They know exactly when the talk is about to come and they cringe. And a study in UCD by Abby Hyde reported that teenagers will often then just resist their parents' attempts. So I think it goes back to that point about the age of 13 being a kind of crucial period. That's your chance to get in there. And parents worry that they will lack knowledge, that they won't have sufficient information to give. I want to talk now just briefly about those gender roles that we've talked about before. We know that gender plays a big role in this sense of discomfort and comfort around these conversations. And that ESRI report found that there was a very clear divide in the ease of these conversations. Young women find it easier to talk to their mothers, young men find it easier to talk to their fathers. But if you drill down into that, nearly 60% of young men still reported it being difficult to talk to their fathers. So while it's still easier than talking to your mum, it's still not an easy conversation. And parents themselves have reported generally having more interest, or I suppose talking more to their daughters than their sons. And some of the research suggests that the information that they're giving to their daughters is more risk averse, it's more concerned with the negative aspects of sexuality. And that might reflect some of the more stereotypical or kind of gender-specific roles that parents themselves might hold. But finally, just to talk about the cultural barriers, because we know that there's big generational differences here. Older parents might struggle more. We know that there might be religious values. And I mean, if you look at the USA and you look at, say, abstinence-based education, you could pretty much track that along kind of socio-political lines. And there might be very different attitudes and norms held by liberal parents versus conservative parents. And I think it's an opportunity for us here to kind of consider, well, Ireland has made massive changes in the last 10, 20 years. We've moved towards a more liberalised society. And how can parents themselves as individuals harness that in the way that they develop and talk to their children and have those relationships? Excuse me. So I'd like to end here by just saying, to go back to the beginning, communication is not happening in a vacuum. Children's needs are changing and society's values, norms and attitudes are changing all the time too. But at the heart of all of this work is a very clear finding that the quality of the relationship between the parents and their children is a key determinant of both whether these discussions are happening at all and then the ease at which these conversations are happening. But we need to start to think as well about the children who are not getting the right information, the right advice and the right support. And we know that young men are less likely to have these conversations than young women at all. We know that young men in lower income families, but particularly in rural areas, may be more vulnerable to this lack of information and advice from their parents. So just to finish just by saying this kind of work is only made possible by the research that's out there. We have lovely qualitative information from Catherine Conlon. We have great quantitative information for the ESRI, both of which were funded and commissioned by the SHCPP. So it allows us to gain these kinds of insights to understand what's happening in Ireland. And we in the SHCPP are really involved in harnessing that information, good quality, robust information, and developing and informing everything that we do, be it the development of resources and all of our service provision. So I'll stop there, and I'd like to thank everybody for listening and to the team for their help in all of this. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks very much, Nicola. Okay, so all throughout today, I suppose we've been having conversations about how it's difficult to have these conversations, the importance of the conversations, and the scientific evidence that shows that early interactions and regular interactions have good outcome. Well, it brings us to the point of today, which is the work done by the SHCPP in developing these resources. So I'd like to introduce Moira Germaine. She's the Education and Training Manager with the team to talk a little bit about what the HSE is doing to support parents and particularly to introduce those resources. Moira.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you all very much for coming. And it's just lovely to see so many people in the room who are interested in the topic, and lovely to see people that we've worked with before in the other statutory agencies and also in the NGOs. And I know a lot of you are doing work with parents, and it would be lovely if the work we're doing, the work you're doing, is actually kind of forming this critical mass, because what we're asking parents to do can be quite difficult. You know, if you think that we have come from an age in a society where we're telling people it's taboo, it's silent, don't talk about it, and suddenly we're saying, oh, you really should, it's your duty, it's your responsibility. So we can't do that without providing the right supports, because all you do is end up with parents feeling even more guilty than they do at the moment, you know, with all the pressures of modern life. So, as Nicola said, there is really, really good evidence to suggest that parents matter. They make a difference. We can't leave this up to the schools, as important as they are. We can't leave this up to the youth work sector or the community sector. We have to support parents to understand that what they're doing at the moment is part of the relationships and sexuality development. So it's not like they're not doing anything, they just don't know sometimes they're not doing it. So to say to parents, you're already engaged in this, you're already doing this, and we would like to support you to do it more consciously and to maybe build in some of the subjects that you might feel a little bit trickier, you know, a little bit more sensitive. And you were saying that yourself, Jonathan, earlier, you know, that the little bits that we kind of, I suppose, we do what our parents did. We do what we know. And we're just wanting to say to parents, maybe think about it. You know, does what you've always done serve you? Does it serve your child? And as Nicola said, you know, the research tells us, and Catherine Conlon's research certainly told us, that the parents did have all those concerns. They absolutely did. You know, will I go too far? Will I say too much? What will other parents think of me? You know, all those really normal feelings that I'm sure everyone in this room can empathize with. And we just want to say to parents, look, you know, take it easy, take it gently. It's not a big talk. And it's a lovely kind of phrase, you know, making the big talk, many small talks. And it is our campaign phrase, and we're really proud of it. It's kind of neat. But I would also really like to emphasize it's not just about the talking. Anya said earlier, and Angelica and Darius said it's about the listening. And it's not just about the listening, it's about the doing. It's about the relationship. It's about those everyday bits where you and your child interact and they get messages about what it is to be in good relationship with somebody else. And how that, I suppose we've always had this history of kind of separating out your sexuality. You know, there's life and then there's sexuality. And even, we didn't really talk about sexuality, we talked about sexual health or sex. And we certainly kept those separate. So I suppose what we're really wanting to say is that they're not separate. They're absolutely not separate. They're completely integrated. So when the HSE and the Department of Education and TUSLA and everybody else, you know, talks to parents and say, this is how you support your child, you know, in their physical development, in their mental development, in their social development, we're also wanting to say, and this is how you support your child in their relationship and sexuality development. So, I've gone way ahead of my slides, but anyway. So, I'll move on. So I suppose I just want to say a little bit about to start, you know, where we're starting from. So obviously SHCPP is the organisation that leads out on the implementation of the National Sexual Health Strategy. And when I first came into this business, I thought it was all about contraception, STIs, and unplanned pregnancies. And once we got those sorted, what were we going to do after dinner? That was it. And in the 20 years, would you believe, I've been working in the area, not always SHCPP, I've come to realise that it's actually so much broader. Sexuality is an integral part of us, of what it is to be human. It's how we experience ourselves as sexual beings from the moment we're born, the moment we die. It's not all about sexual activity. That is a very important part, but it's a part that most people decide to have in their lives at some stage. But even if they never decide to be sexually active, they are sexual beings. So Anna Freud, psychoanalyst, came up with this lovely quote that sums it up. Sex is what we do, and sexuality is who we are. So our job is to help children and young people know a bit more who they are. And in this way, they form a positive relationship with themselves, which is completely foundational to every relationship that ever comes afterwards. Often when we talk about this area of work with children and young people, we constantly talk about in relationship with other people. But it has to start with the child themselves, developing a positive sense of self-worth, of self-esteem, and understanding who they are. And that has to start in the home. The child is in the home for the vast majority of their young lives, and certainly for the first 3-4 years. They might be in daycare as well, but that's where they are. So if they're not getting messages about their worth, their intrinsic value as a human being, then it is very hard for the catch-up later on. So this is a lovely model of what sexuality can include. It's not the model, it's not definitive. The very nice people in Teaching Sexual Health Canada let us adapt it and use it for the Irish. Mostly adapting it was taking out the Zs in socialisation and stuff like that. So it wasn't a great deal of work. We do love those partnerships. So this will give you an idea, if you're thinking about, what it can include. So your sexuality is about your values, your relationships, your activity at a time in your life when it's right for you, communication with other people, your socialization, your self-image, which is very important, your experiences, your sex, your sexual orientation, your gender expression, your gender identity, your personality. It's big, it's broad, and you can see that it interacts with every other part of your makeup and who you are. So it's a positive and it's an expansive concept. And as Nicola said, a lot of the work in the past, and maybe a lot of the messages that our children were getting, were all about the negative. Don't do this, don't do that, oh, don't come home pregnant, oh, don't get somebody pregnant. They're very, I suppose, always phrased in the risk and the negativity. And it is obviously really, really important that we work with children and young people around, how to keep themselves as safe as possible. But we need to situate that piece of work in the broader piece, that your sexuality and how you express it in the world is a positive resource for your life. You understanding who you are and how you relate to yourself and other people, and how you relate maybe in a sexual relationship at a time that's right for you, is positive, and it has physical health benefits, mental health benefits, social health benefits. And that's the positive message that we want to get across. So we did talk about the words, but for the time our children are born, they're getting conscious and unconscious messages from us. Because sometimes parents say to us, when should I start? And it's usually around puberty. They think, oh God, I put it off, but really there's no choice here. We've got to go for it now. And what they don't realize is that they've been doing it from the minute the child is born. When my son was born, I was in the hospital, a nurse came in and she said, "Oh, what did you have?" I thought a baby, but anyway, apart from that. But I did say, you know, he's a boy, and she changed his blanket. And I swear that's not made up for the sake of this talk. She changed the blanket from pink to blue. And I don't know why. Maybe in the hospital, to be fair, maybe it was some sort of shorthand, I don't know. But she did, she changed the blanket because, you know, boys blue, girls pink. And actually, that's actually quite a new notion. It used to be the other way around. But, you know, it's very strong that boys are certain beings and girls are certain beings. And we treat them and we touch them and we talk to them in different ways. So the more we bring our attention to that, the more we can make choices and think, is that really what we want to be doing? You know, do we want to be saying to boys, you know, man up and da da da, or girls, oh, you look really pretty in that. And I do it all the time, you know. We give these messages. So just to check ourselves and think, is that really the message I want to give? Maybe it is, but at least if you're aware, you have a choice. So a lovely 1950s little graphic there, you know, the woman in her very nice dress with her lipstick on, all dolled up, the little girl in pink, the dad on the couch. You know, that probably seems very alien to most people in this room. But that's an extreme. If you think about your own households and how, in many cases, we still do very gendered roles, which is fine if it suits us, but the question is, does it? Does it suit us? So it's just raising those issues. Also, Anya and other people talked about body parts. You know, from the moment the child is born and you're changing the nappies and whatever, there are bits you talk about and bits you don't. And, you know, we're really saying to parents, if you can use the words, that's really good. Because they may feel loaded to you. Oh, how could I say, you know, penis to my little boy, whatever. If you tell a boy or, you know, somebody with a penis that they've got a penis, that's what they've got. You know, it's only our kind of history and baggage that makes it any different. And the other bit, the big heart in the middle, is about we're giving them unconscious and conscious messages about love. Love, relationships, how you respectfully connect with other people. You know, these are all the messages. And we're giving them so much more, but these were the nice little graphics that I could find. So that will tell you where we are there. So because we know how important, from the research, we know how important it is, the HSE has been engaged in supporting parents for a very long time. You know, this isn't new, but we have some new elements to it. So, for instance, in the SHCPP, we develop resources and we otherwise make resources available. So that might mean we fund other organizations to make the resources available. Because strangely enough, all the wisdom doesn't reside with us, although sometimes we like to think it does. We support the MPC Primary and the IFPA to provide training to parents. And we work with other statutory agencies like TUSLA to develop resources to support foster parents and social work and social care workers. So that's kind of the broad range of what we do. One of the earliest pieces we did in this area, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what exists before I tell you about the new stuff. So we partnered with the people who have developed mychild.ie because that's something, first of all, it used to be booklets that was given to parents, new parents, you know, when their children were born, about the first 5 years, about the development and how they can support their child's development. And years ago, we said to them, would you think of putting a little bit in around sexuality and healthy sexuality, which was, you know, kind of a bit groundbreaking at the time, and they have. So when parents get their booklet or go onto the website now, mychild.ie, there's a section that says, you know, healthy sexuality development. So it's giving that message to parents that you matter and make a difference from the moment your child is born. And you can, you know, support them to be healthy and well. This was our first foray into the world of parent booklets. So we developed a 2-booklet resource for parents of 4 to 7-year-olds on the back of the work that was done by Catherine Conlon. So if parents were telling us that despite all those kind of barriers and awkwardnesses. They wanted to talk to their parents. They wanted to talk to their children. They particularly wanted their children's experience to be better. You know, they were saying, yes, it's really cringy. Yes, it's really awkward. But I remember what it was like to not know. I remember being with, you know, other people who were kind of having these jokes and whatever, and I was going, ha ha, but actually I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, you know? I was the butt of that, or I got into situations, you know, with people, and now I kind of, you know, would have actually preferred not to. So parents are telling us this, so we want to help them. And as Nicola said, getting in early is really important. Now, I do want to give the message, it's never too late. But if you want to have impact and if you want to make it as easy for the parent and the child, starting as early as possible is the key. So this resource, 4 to 7-year-olds, it deals with the kind of common issues of that age range and how parents might address them. All our resources give a small amount of information, and then they have a bit that says, what you might do. And that's really important because every family, every child is different. You know, they have, when you talk about values, you know, they all have their own value systems and own priorities and environments, and the child, we talk about age appropriate, but actually it's really developmental stage appropriate. And sure, who knows better at what stage a child is than their parents. So they have this bit that says what you might do. And those suggestions are based on good practice nationally and internationally. But then it's up to parents to think, is this right for me? Is it right for my child? And we also signpost them to other resources. So this is the little 3 or 4-year-old that goes, why? Why do you have, you know, why is your penis bigger than mine? Why do you know, what's this a bit, you know, somebody calls this a front bum. Why do we call this a vulva? Oh, by the way, we want to reclaim the vulva. You know, we talk a lot about vaginas, which is a win. I just want to say, I don't want to diss the vagina, but we do want to say, you know, that the research also tells us that the people have a particular difficulty naming female body parts. And the more we can name the parts, the more we can talk about them in clinical settings, but also the more we can talk about them in our lives, and the more protective it is for our children, that they can tell us that something is amiss, and they can tell us where it's amiss, you know, rather than there's something kind of a bit funny down there. So this is how you talk to your little 3 or 4-year-old that goes, why, you know, or you catch them playing doctors or whatever, you know, all those usual scenarios. Then we come on to the 8 to 12s, and this is the bit where most parents think they will start. And if you haven't started before, it's a good place to start, but if you can go earlier, all the better. And it is, you know, we would suggest that you begin talking about the changes of puberty before they happen. Because yes, a lot of young people find it stressful and strange. And there is evidence to say that those whose parents have talked to them are more prepared for it. So yes, it is difficult. For some people, you know, they don't want to leave childhood, so having a period or whatever is difficult. Or, you know, a first wet dream is difficult. But how more difficult is it if you don't know what the hell it is? Or you think it's going to last forever. It'll never stop, you know? So the more parents can think about it in advance, what are my child's needs? What are they likely to need? How might I go about drip feeding this information from an earlier time? Not, you know, the one talk that gets it all out of the way in a big burst. And we also have a really nice resource, Busybodies. You're probably familiar with if you work with children, if you work in the school sector. You'd be pretty familiar with this. It was updated in 2020. And it also talks about not just puberty, but adolescence. And because we know that there's lots and lots of good commercial information out there, we've partnered with the local government management agency, And we worked with our colleagues up in Donegal in CHO1 in health promotion and in the library service and the youth service. And we worked to have this collection of commercial books in 330 libraries of the country, so that there's even more support. You know, there are booklets on different types of families, on how to talk about things, on booklets or books for adolescents on various bits of growing up and identity. There's a whole range out there. And we developed this brochure to tell parents that they're there and what they are. And we worked with TUSLA. So this is on the website. So if any of you, if you work with young people, whether it's in the youth work sector, the education sector, social care, social work, residential, whatever, although this was developed to address the needs of young people in care, there's loads of information for everybody that is interested in the care and support of young people. And that's available on the website. And we're also looking in the future at maybe working with TUSLA to do some training, particularly for foster parents. So that's the past. So we're aware that as much as we love our books, a lot of parents won't read them. We're hoping more parents will read them. We're hoping that teachers might use them, maybe support their teaching. They're not developed for teachers, but there's a lot of information in there that will support the preparation for RSE. But we are aware that people have different ways of taking in information. So one of our new resources that I'm very pleased to be telling you we have today is a selection of 9 videos. 9 short animated videos that address some of the questions and concerns and issues that parents of younger children might have. Those of you who work in the area might be aware of an organization called amaze.org. They're an American charity. They're associated with Advocates for Youth, which has a really long sexual health pedigree in supporting young people. And they have a whole range of videos for young people. They're really, really good if you want to go and have a look at them. We're looking to do a bit more work with them in the future. And they also have a selection of 9 videos for the parents. Now, they are really good in their original form, but we're aware that in Ireland we get a lot of stuff that is not, that's developed for another jurisdiction and has those irritating little things that you go, yeah, that's American, that's English. It's kind of there, but it's not quite. So what we did with our lovely friends from Amaze is we've taken the videos and we have slightly adapted them for the Irish context to have voices and some of the kind of phraseology that we would have. So without further ado, I am going to, a bit more ado. I'm just going to show you, these are the range of titles. Why do you talk to children about relationships and sexuality, which is a big question. Why would I go there? Well, we've already told you why. When should you start talking to children about relationships and sexuality? From forever. Where do babies come from? So that's obviously a question that lots of children ask. But the even more difficult question is, all right, okay, they come from their grand. How are they made? How do they get in there? Which is even the more tricky question. When children are curious about bodies, because they are. That's why they play doctors. That's why they say, show me yours and I'll show you mine, type stuff. So what might a parent do there? And then what if my child doesn't ask questions? Because you mentioned earlier, Anya, children get the message, and Darius and Angelica, when you're talking, you were just saying that if parents don't engage, or if they don't pick up on those cues that children might be giving them, they mightn't ask a direct question because they've already got the message, we don't talk about these things in this family. That's not for us. So if my child doesn't ask questions, it's not like, phew, dodge that bullet, Jonathan. It is thinking about, okay, so, where are they in their lives? What's going on in their life? Where are they in their friendships? Where are they about their bodies? Am I noticing they're getting a bit more private? Am I noticing that, just you pick up on the cues? My own mother, now to give her a due, it was a very different time, but she said that when my oldest brother, one day out of the blue, going around household stuff, he said, "What's sex?" And she said, she's there plumping up the pillows, going, this is the moment, this is the moment. And in the meantime, when she was trying to get her act together, he said, "Is it anything to do with insects?" And she said, "Yes." They never spoke about it again. I swear. Now, obviously, he got information somewhere else. But she told that story, like in her 70s and 80s. It stayed with her. She was being given a gift. And, not to shame her or guilt her or whatever, because she was acting out of where she was. And to be fair, she was actually thinking of giving him a decent response, for a woman of that age. But she missed the opportunity, and it stayed with her. It stayed with her. So we want to support parents to not miss those opportunities, to see those opportunities in everyday life, and to gradually and gently and incrementally have those conversations. And what, can I teach my values? Parents sometimes, and we were talking about this, the liberal stuff and all that. Parents might look at our books and go, "That's not my family. That's not us. We believe in this, and is it okay for me to share my values?" And of course it is. It's not our job to tell parents how to run their families. But we would like to suggest that sharing values is really important. The vast majority of parents want to instill in their children what it is to be in good, respectful relationships with other people, what it is to be in mutually enjoyable, supportive, nourishing relationships with somebody. But we have to be clear that our values are to support our children to develop their values. They have to live in the world as autonomous adults, making their own choices. So sharing values is really important. As children get older, imposing them is less so. People have to be given the right to take in information from the family of origin, from the school, and from all other resources, and develop their own value set from which they will make their choices in the future and the choices for any family they might have. And what do I do when, Jonathan, you mentioned this, what do I do when children ask questions about mature topics? When they hear stuff on radio that you'd prefer they didn't, and they say things like, what is incest, what is assault, what is harassment? And, as you were saying earlier, if they're asking it, it's in their lives. So it's really important that we acknowledge what they're saying. As Anya said, not leap in. I'm sure you know the old joke, but I'll say it to you anyway, because I'm very bad at telling jokes. The one where the child says, "Where did I come from?" And the mother goes, "Well, egg, sperm, da, 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 da." And they're saying, "No, actually, John said he comes from Leitrim." I was just wondering, So it is going back to that, check with the child. Check with the child what they're really asking. And then gently build up the information. So you can talk about mature topics, but small bits, small bits that you can build on as time goes on. And what should I know about gender? And a lot of the bit here on gender is talking about the gender stereotype, which is around the gender binary. We were talking a little bit about that at the beginning. Whether or not we identify as a man or a woman, we live in a world that's actually very gendered along those lines. So even if you don't identify within those, your life is affected by it. So what should I know about gender? It says a little bit about the gender stereotyping and choices parents might make, and a little bit about gender identity. And I'm probably running way over time because I talk too much. Jonathan, will you keep me in check? Yeah. Put you on the spot there. I just... How much more you have left? Not much. No. Okay. Then we're fine. Oh! No. So this is meant to play. No. Sorry. Okay. So this is meant to play. No. I'm just going to play a few minutes of this, if that's okay.
Welcome everyone, and thanks for coming. I know it's tough for parents to get out sometimes.
No, I think it's great to have this kind of support when it comes to talking to our children.
To be honest, I didn't exactly choose to be here. I mean, what does sex have to do with our 3-year-old? I didn't learn about this stuff until secondary school, and that was fine with my parents.
A lot of us, including me, had that kind of experience as kids. What do the rest of you think?
I grew up thinking that sex was something shameful, but that's wrong. I can already see that our 2-year-old is curious about her body. It's pretty funny.
And isn't it better they learn from us rather than other kids who only think they know what they're talking about because their parents don't talk to them either?
My 9-year-old's friend actually told her just last week that girls eat their tampons. She saw it online.
Okay, but still, how do you know the right thing to say? If you get it wrong or if it's too much too soon, couldn't that be harmful?
For many generations, adults thought that shielding children from learning about sexuality was the safe thing to do. The truth is, better educated children are way more likely to make better decisions as they grow up. About everything, including relationships and sexuality. But with sexuality, there's still a double standard that says knowledge could be harmful.
I know you're right, but I'm so embarrassed by the words I'd have to say.
And isn't it better for mothers to talk to daughters than fathers to talk to boys?
Children, especially young children, look to grown-ups for information simply because we're trusted adults, regardless of characteristics like gender. And one of the best things we can do is give the message that everybody can talk and learn from each other about this subject.
I get it, but I still don't know if I can say the word penis in front of my child.
Embarrassment is one of those catchy feelings. And most of us caught embarrassment about sexual things from people around us when we were very young. So we never get to find out that these words are just words and that it's really healthy and okay to say them out loud.
You're right. Why should I be embarrassed to say testicles or erections?
Nipples?
Masturbation. Vulva. Clitoris.
Ejaculation.
Scrotum.
Vagina.
Penis!
Good job, everyone. And with a little practice, I think you guys will be ready to make the big talk, many small talks, and become the askable parents that you want to be.
Okay. Actually, one of the bits at the very end of that just touches on the talk and the cringy and the embarrassing bit. It's okay to be embarrassed. I've worked in the area a very long time, and there are still things that I kind of feel my face kind of flushing up about. It's okay. If we were to wait to not be embarrassed, we would never talk about these things. Adults would never be able to have a conversation with their partners about their sexual preference and all that. It's a really good life message to be saying to your child, yeah, it is a bit embarrassing, because from where I was brought up and blah, blah, blah. And it's still worth having the conversation, There are lots of things that we might get embarrassed about. There are lots of sensitive topics that we might want to talk to our children about that have nothing to do with relationships and sexuality. And if we were to stop every time it was a bit awkward or a bit difficult, we'd never have those conversations. So it's really important to have those conversations. And to know that they will be awkward, embarrassing, great. You'll come away feeling, yeah, I am such a good parent. I really nailed that one at times. And they'll be funny. They'll be, oh my God, did I really say that? Oh, did they really say that? They will be funny. Working in this area, one of the biggest pleasures is it's always funny. You come to our team meetings and they're all very serious. and then they're also quite funny. You know, it's just the nature of the business. So it's great if you get to it when they're young. When we know that at this stage, the other resource we're launching today is the booklet for parents of 13 to 8-year-olds. And in some ways, this was the hardest one to do because, you know, obviously we can kind of focus the 4 to 7 around the questions children usually ask, the 8 to 12, loads around puberty and that type of stuff. 13 to 18, it may only be 5 years, but it's a world of difference. You know, a 13-year-old, they're at the beginning of their adolescent journey. An 18-year-old is an adult. And you're still a parent to them, you know? So it is how you navigate that journey together in the hope that you'll come out still in good relationship at the end. So knowing that sometimes at this age, parents think that they're peripheral. And as Nicola said, the research tells us they're not. Young people might give you all the messages about go away, you know, talk to the hand, blast stuff. But actually, parents are still the biggest and most consistent influence on their children at this age. This is an age when children are moving out, you know, they're individuating, they're more attaching to friends and listening to friends and looking for information from all different sources. But the parents are the consistent, kind of the grounding space, the place where they can judge the information that's coming in from different places and say, oh, does that fit with how I see the world? Does that fit with my own values? Does that fit with how my family operates? You know, so it's kind of to be that touchstone. So, you know, these are the children at the different stages, you know, the 13-year-olds, the 15-year-olds, the 18-year-olds, and it's how do parents support their children to make that journey in a way that's well, you know, that they're well and safe. Oops. Mm-hmm. 2 minutes over. Thank you. Oh, come on. Okay. These are the type of the contents within the 13 to 18-year-old book. I won't read them out, but you can see that it touches on a lot of things. But I particularly want to say to you that it places relationship and sexuality development in the broader positive youth development. In the booklet, we use, it's a very prominent model of youth development, the 6 C's. Because what we're saying is that it's not, we put a lot of emphasis on information, but sure, if information made us all do things, changed our behavior, sure, wouldn't we be paragons? We'd all be out there exercising, eating well, taking care of our mental health, doing all the things we know we should do. So it's not just about information, it's about developing the attitudes and skills. So we've placed all the information within this broader notion of what young people need to develop in terms of being, you know, well in themselves. So the 6 competencies and relationships and sexuality through that. They're the competence, confidence, connection, character, caring, contribution. So when you've sorted your kids out and they're able to, you know, master all of those, they're sorted. These are the resources we have available. The 4 to 7 book, the 8 to 12, the library collection, that should have been the 13 to 18, a little problem there, and the research summary. And we also have other information on sexualwellbeing.ie. The last message I would want to say, most of you here work with parents and some of you are parents. The biggest job of parents through the years and the biggest job of parents through the adolescent years is to be a safe harbor, to prepare your children to launch into the world, to have great adventures, to be a bit battered and bruised, and to come back to a safe, nurturing environment, to be bolstered up so they can go off again. And it's our work in the HSE more broadly and in HSE SHCPP to support parents on that journey. Very last. It takes a village. You know the phrase, and it's true. It's not schools versus parents, school versus youth work, parents versus youth work, parents versus community. It's all of us. We all need to be providing spaces for young people to be having these conversations. GAA clubs, drama clubs, all of them, they all have a role to play. So it takes a village. None of us need to do this alone. None of us need to feel that it's all on us. It's about the whole of us. These are all the organisations and the lovely people that helped us develop these resources. I won't call them out, but we don't do this alone. We don't sit down and think that would be a really good idea. Let's write this. We research it. We research the literature on it, not just the literature in terms of the evidence to do it, but what's the evidence around what children need? What's the evidence around what parents need? Who's doing what internationally and nationally, and how can we build on that? So these are all the people who inputted and who reviewed it and gave us really, really valuable feedback. And you can download the resources at the QR code that's on the table. And can I ask you, if you take, apart from parents really matter, if you take another message from here is, can you help us, please, to disseminate these resources? To say that they're out there, to say that the Sexual Wellbeing website has more information for parents, and to say that we will continue to work in this space. Our work is not done. We will look, these are kind of generalized, standardized stuff, and we will actually want to work more with, I suppose, more specific needs. Sorry, Jonathan, and thank you.
You're fine. So I'd like to welcome Kay up now. Dr. Kay Mauncell is an Associate Professor of Psychology, Human Development and Education in the School of Human Development at DCU. I'm going to just leave it there, Kay, because you heard already. So Kay's going to share her perspective of what she's been hearing from some of the tables, and then we'll get to our final panel with all of the stakeholders and get some of your comments and statements. So the facilitators, I think, are still collecting those. But Kay, if you'd like to come up and give us your thoughts.
All of that bump, I suppose, positions me here today, but we're all here together on this journey. We all come with, I suppose, not just a passion at our professional levels, but also an interest and wanting a better lives for our next generation and the generations to come. I mean, that's what brings every single one of us here today. And so many, I know that I speak from the very moment I came in, and the responses of colleagues and the team in the HSC, SHCPP was that, just so welcoming of your engagement and your presence here today. So it's a real testament to, I suppose, this particular aspect of our lives and our roles and the work that we do. So wow is what I'll say to Darius and Angelica, and ably supported and complimented by Anya in terms of representing parents, but really we're here because of young people, children and young people. That is the centre. We heard, language around child-led, young person-led. That's the goal, that's the vision. At one of the tables that I didn't get around to all the tables, but I got around to many, and that was one of the I suppose, comments that I picked up on. We're coming through a cultural change, very significant cultural change here in Ireland, and particularly, I think, in relation to our talking about, we're great storytellers. We've no problem in telling stories, and the way that we do, we're known all over the world. We've global fame as storytellers and writers and so on. But one of the areas, or one of the key areas where we remain silent, was in relation to our relationships and sexuality education. But that is changing. We've opened the door, and the wind is coming through. The sails are set as the adventures happen, as Moira pointed out, for the children and young people. And we as adults, and adults in children and young people's lives, we play a very key role, a very central role in enabling them and empowering young people to bring, to express themselves, to be able to talk about what's going on for them, what's happening for them. You know, usually about relationships, usually about their friends or about how things are going or not going. And as they grow up, it might be who they like and who they don't like, and somebody doesn't like them and somebody does, and so on. It's the day-to-day things. And it's those opportunities where, you know, the kind of the anxiety or the fears around the big talk, the conversations that we have moved along to see this is every day. This is every day in every way we connect. We connect with children and young people at where they're at. I've listened to teachers, I've listened to you know, representatives from parent groups, I've listened to young people here today, I've listened to government, you know, statutory agents working in government with government responsibility and so on for policy making, and we've listened to researchers, and Nicola's, you know, encapsulating of the research that underpins the communications, the messages that are coming so strongly today and regularly from the Sexual Health and Crisis Pregnancy Programme. So these are really important conversations, and we're modelling them today. We're modelling the big talk in smaller spaces, around a table, where conversations when we go home, we will continue to do with the children and young people that are in our lives. Around the table, in the car, you know, in the classroom, in the spaces that where we have interaction with young people. And a hearing or a lesson or a message I heard was, we're learning together. We don't have all the answers. The resources that have been published today are very much supporting parents and carers and wider, I suppose, stakeholders in the supporting and empowering young people and children's ability to open up and be honest with ourselves and with their parents, their guardians, their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, the wider community of relationships that they have. Because relationships and sexuality education is both social and relational. You know, it is much bigger. We've heard today, it's much bigger than just about sex. All right, it's much bigger. It is integral to ourselves, our life, our well-being. And we know this as adults, and I suppose our dream, and one of the tables asked how will we fulfill our dream in this area? You know, how will we know that we have achieved? And we will know that we have achieved this when we have conversations where it's not extraordinary. It's not extraordinary to be talking about sex. Yeah? It's not extraordinary. It won't be shame-inducing. It won't be embarrassing. It's okay to be embarrassed, but it won't be embarrassing or might not be as embarrassing going forward. So there's really strong sense around a kind of a commitment to public education from birth right the way through. We all are learning. we're learning today from, the conversations we're having around tables. We're learning from the panels that we've heard and we'll hear back from. We're learning from each other. And children learn from their relationships and within their relationships also. And it's not just parents, it's wider. One of my key hearings is around the connection between, I suppose, what I've heard is partnership a lot coming through. And I noted, parents with the child, this resource helps, and particularly the video. I loved the video, and I've heard really positive responses from yourselves around having that maybe as a catalyst or a stimulus to start conversations with parents and to disseminate the resources wider. But this resource brings parents, guardians, carers, those with responsibility for, I suppose, being with and supporting and enabling and empowering children. It brings them together with their child or young person. That's key. It's not parent and, it's parent with, or parent carer, and at a personal level, bringing people together. What I also heard is schools together with families, families together with schools. We can't do this alone. I'm in education, I'm working with teachers and with teacher professional development, but we can't do this alone. We are stronger together. Schools with parents. How we work that. We had a lovely discussion at this table about how we can bring that forward, because it's not the norm. The structures aren't generally there, but we can envision how we might set up our processes and structures that actually where parents and families and so on work together with schools. It's happening. We've great examples of good practice. And I'm sure Anya can tell us lots about that from her perspective, Anya Lynch, in the National Parents Council. So there's a really strong, I suppose, commitment to family and centering of family, and family and education together working on this. And then we have teachers with young people, not transmission, not kind of teacher professional development to. It's teacher professional development with the young people in their classrooms. Listening to, talking with, listening to authentic dialogue with Darius, with Angelica. What a world we can shape together for the betterment of our society at large. And we need to have, I suppose, our eye, again at the tables, the conversation was raised. We need to have our eyes on those that are less visible, matters that are less visible, issues that are less visible, people that are less visible. We really need to keep asking, are we including everyone in the with and in the together? That's really, really key, because public education is exactly that. It's the whole public. And we need to look at working with minorities, working with children out of one of the key, I suppose, early pieces of research I did was working with children out of school or about to leave school, and their opportunities reduce time and time again for access to relationships and sexuality education. So we always need to keep asking ourselves and inquiring, who are we not reaching? Who is not included in the with? Together, we can create an inclusive and comprehensive and holistic relationships and sexuality education for our future generations. We are doing it. We are doing it today, and we can do it into the future for them as well. So you're all champions. You all take, as Moira said, take these resources, take them with you, and share them. You know, bring another champion on board. Bring one more person with you. All right? That's what I'm asking today. So take these home, take these back to your workplaces, take these away with you today, but share them with at least one other. All right? Because you are the change makers. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. That was brilliant. Okay. I love that idea of a keynote listener. We might implement it now in my own conferences. So we're going to finish off with a panel of folks from all the stakeholders, as I said. So if you can welcome back from Corlin and Oak, Darius, from the ISSU, Angelica Foley, and Anya Lynch, who's the CEO of the National Parent Council Primary, and also on stage Nicola O'Connell, the SCHCPP Research Manager, and Moira Germaine, who you heard there earlier, the Education and Training Manager from the SHCPP. Right, you can give us some applause to cover us as we get to there we go. Yeah, thank you. Excellent. Okay, so some easy ones to start off with, Moira, and the first question is, are the videos just for parents or are they to be watched with young people?
The videos are created for parents, and if you have a look, you know, that makes it very obvious. So they'll just provide a stimulus for, you know, parents to have those conversations, but they're not actually, you know, cartoons or whatever for children.
And someone else says, what's next in the series? Can we expect more of them?
Well, what's next in the series, what we're planning, is actually to adapt some of the videos that are focused on young people. We're working at the moment with our colleagues in the HSE on a bigger resource for junior cycle SPHE. So we're doing the RSE element of that. And we're looking to adapt some of their young people videos to complement that. So that's up and coming.
Very good. Darius, do you talk to your peers about this topic? And what are those? I mean, obviously we're going into details. What are the conversations like?
I do, and one of the main things that comes up is you find information that you're unsure what it means, and that's how you get your questions that you ask your parents or schools. But also, when I talk to my peers, what sometimes happens is I am shut down by my peers. Like parents are shut down by like teenagers shut down their parents. And when you look at it, it's a similar relation. That embarrassment, that lack of talk is an issue.
The teenagers don't want to talk to the other teenagers. Yeah, because it's kind of a bit awkward for them, or they feel there's some reason why they don't want to engage. Really interesting. Angelica?
Yeah, well, I suppose when it comes to teenagers, we'll talk about anything and everything. But when it comes to RSE, you might be really surprised about this. Now, in the past couple of years, it's become a lot more prevalent thanks to a certain Netflix TV series called Sex Education. And astonishingly, some of the conversations we'd have is, wow, we never learned that in school. Because a TV show such as Sex Education is actually teaching us more than what we know in school. And I think that shows a lot about why we need resources such as this, so our parents can give us the knowledge that we're not getting anywhere else.
Yeah, there was talk about getting various levels of quality of this information coming in. And Darius, I was surprised, I suppose I shouldn't be, I was surprised to hear that religion is the class in which you still get your sexuality awareness and sexual development information. What is that like? I mean, how is that delivered? Is it not just a bit strange to have it in that environment, or does it matter?
It does matter. And like in terms of religion, nowadays in some schools religion is just the SPHE class for senior cycle students. And that just seems to show that they don't care. Like, if we want to show that we care, we give a specific subject. We show that it's important to us. But just having one class that's called religion once a week doesn't really show care.
Well, is there any research on this, Nicola? I mean, should we be teaching about sexual health and gender fluidity and all these things that are very topical at the moment? Should that come under the realm of religion in a Catholic school?
I mean, there's no research that I'm aware of, even within an Irish context, but I know from my own experience that the priest also gave us our religious education for 6 years, and it was taken as an opportunity to make fun of him. I know we were asked to ask questions, and to save everybody's blushes, we were able to put it into a box, so he didn't know who was asking the question. And most of the questions were, what's a 69er? Where do you get your porn? And in fairness to him, actually, he answered those with a straight face. So I wonder whether it's more about the empathy or how empathetic the person is, and how they're able to kind of keep maybe their own values at bay, rather, and their ability to communicate. So I suppose it's a question. I mean, it might be difficult for somebody who maybe does have specific views on this to be able to just give open, honest information.
Yeah.
I don't know. And it's probably quite individualistic. It's probably down to the person.
Angelica, you want to say something?
Yeah, if I could just come in there. There was a recent report released there by the inspector over the Department of Education, and I think it found a figure that I think we'll all be quite shocked by, that at senior cycle, only 1 in 5 schools actually timetable SPHE. 1 in 5. So when we're looking at religion, that's really where the gap is being filled, and it is really problematic. In fact, just 2 weeks ago I was speaking to a student, and I won't name the school, but it was in the southeast of the country, and in that senior cycle, that 6th year class where they're supposed to be getting their SPHE, their information about all things sexual well-being, their teacher was not allowed to mention the word abortion when asked about it. Abortion is now legal in this country, but when the teacher was asked about crisis pregnancies and termination of pregnancies, because the teacher wasn't able to mention the word due to the school's ethos, the teacher had to write it up sexualwellbeing.ie on the classroom board, because the teacher felt that student needs that information, but I can't give it to them because I'm bound by the rules of my school. So that really goes to show how prevalent of an issue this is and why we need secular education in schools.
I don't want to hijack the whole conversation with this, but it's a particular subject of mine of interest. Anya, what are the parents saying about where, do they have, is there an opinion voiced as to where these kids should be getting it in school and how we should be framing it? I mean, it is really important that it's bolstered through schools, it seems. Should there be a sexual education module, or what's the thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the difficulties that's coming across in this discussion is that sex is both physical, but it's also values. And where does which bit of it lie? And does it all lie with the school? Does all of it lie with the family? Or where's the partnership? And I think until we can get, and Kay was referring to this in terms of that proper partnership between families and schools and a conversation, because I think for parents sometimes the worst thing that can happen to them is their child comes home from school with a question that completely sideswipes them because they didn't even know that was something that was being talked about in school. That's where anger and resentment can build. People feel that their toes have been stepped on, whereas that can actually all be mitigated against in the main. I mean, there'll always be some pieces that are difficult if there's a proper conversation, not a telling of, not a letter home to say we're going to cover this area, but there's a proper conversation in schools between the whole school community. And I also think it's really important that when we talk about the whole school community, we talk about the local community as well, and that has been referred to today, that schools sit within a community where children engage with children and young people. So it's families, community and schools. And that we just have to have better conversations about that. Because I can see, referring to Angelica's point there around abortion, that can be really difficult to navigate between a school and parents on what information is given and isn't given. But you can never navigate that if you don't have a conversation in the first place. Yeah. So what we finish up finding is that people in a state of fear put down very concrete guidelines and boundaries, and it's around fear and protecting people. But actually who gets least protected in that is a young person, because the adults are so concerned about where their roles finish and where other people's roles start, that the young person's left in a vacuum of information in the middle of it. So we have to have these conversations more and more.
Yeah, and I suppose, in an ideal world, you'd be sending your kids to a school that had an ethos that matched yours rather than, the local school that was close to you your only option in some cases, or the only one that would take you in other cases. Following on from that, someone asks, how could schools normalise these conversations from a young age? I suppose they are in a way, but there's more work to be done there, Anya?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the RSE in primary schools is very good. I think we need to normalise it in younger. But I think the main thing is that all of this starts in relationships and friendships. So we need to ground it really well in that. So when we're talking about consent with teenagers, consent isn't just around sexual activity, it's around so when we're talking about consent, we should be talking about that with very, very young children, about, how they play with others and how they share and how they agree. And so we're modelling that, and we're modelling good friendships and the things to value in friendships and the things to value as being a friend, because they're the things that when you get into the sexual area of having your first sexual relationship, what you value in friendships then can be transferred to what you value in sexual relationships and boyfriends and girlfriends. And so we have to start very young with talking about the values in friendships and build on that. The values within families. I mean, what in a family for a very young child is acceptable and not, and why it is and isn't. The please, the thank yous, the sharing, the caring, all of those things build up over the years into healthy friendships and relationships in teenage and beyond.
Darius, what do you think? What can schools do to make it a little less awkward and out of place and didactic, where the teacher says this is, and then there's no real conversation about the issues? What can schools do to do this better, do you think?
It comes down to teachers' education. Lots of teachers doing SPHE in secondary schools usually don't have proper education to give SPHE classes. It's mostly just a throwaway subject that they just choose some random teacher to do, or some young teacher usually. And having a properly educated teacher who's enthusiastic about the subject is really important to just making it more fair and more honest and more expressive for the students.
Angelica?
Yeah, I think I can agree in part with what we're both kind of saying here. And even just going back to my own experiences, when I was in school, when it came to the big talk, it was outsourced in our case. The Parents Association organised a teacher to come in, a nurse to come in, we each paid €5, and we saw a blue dildo and a condom. And as you were saying, when the parents didn't know, there was absolute chaos, people weren't happy. And that's not a solution, that's not adequate at all. But when it comes to teachers, when it comes to SPHE, it's not like maths, it's not like English. There's no set curriculum. There's no, okay, we're going to do algebra today. It's up to each individual school, and that doesn't really work. But when it comes to the teachers themselves, I think really often what we do is we kind of resort to CPD when we're talking to teachers, which is continuous professional development, that if we're, introducing a new junior cycle, we'll have some in-service days CPD. Well, that can be valuable. I think what's really important is that when we're having teachers, when they're doing their initial teacher training, they're having their PME, that's when that knowledge is given to them, similar to having a parent book for parents, having something there for teachers so they can be confident. Because I think that's really important, because the values you were talking about for parents earlier, openness, that's also important in the classroom too. Because we all know back when we were all in school, who was your favourite teacher? It was the one you could talk to, it was the one you could trust, and that's important.
Moira?
Yeah, the whole issue of, we talk about parents' preparation, and there's the whole issue of teachers' preparation. And in some ways, and I know the recent NCCA consultation, when they talked to teachers and parents and young people and all that, I suppose what young people said that they were getting was varied across the country. But I'd probably like to say that, the fact that there are some excellent schools and excellent teachers really has to be acknowledged, because a lot of that is their personal passion for it. They're absolutely dyed in the wool, love SPHE, love RSE, and put a load of time and effort into preparing and support and developing their lesson plans to work with young people. And I really have to, and I absolutely hear what you say, Angelica, CPD isn't enough, but I really would like to recognise the work of the department and its agencies, the JCT and the PDST, in the work that they have done around supporting teachers to teach these really sensitive subjects, which aren't even just sensitive in the classroom, they're sensitive, with parents, with the board's management, with, it can be quite a tricky climate to kind of work in.
Yeah.
So, but just to acknowledge that, and particularly, Jonathan, just one last thing, to acknowledge the pilot project of, kind of developing specialist teacher education around SPHE and RSE. And I think that is a really strong message that's come from the current minister. And I'm really looking forward to see how that plays out and how that expands.
Is there a hesitancy from teachers to talk about this in a way because you're talking about sex with minors and there's a worry about being inappropriate or that something might be taken up the wrong way? Is there an extra sensitivity about that, or is that not really an issue?
I actually started my career as a teacher a million years ago. I was a teacher for about 16 years, and yes, there is a real kind of, if you say something and it's picked up in a certain way and, it doesn't compute with a parent, are you going to get into trouble, blah, 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 or are you just going to say something off the top of your head that suddenly has big, reverberations?
Yeah.
So there absolutely is. But sure, there is as many concerns as there are teachers. Anya said parents are homogenous, teachers aren't either. They can have all different concerns. If you're the teacher who has, no particular interest in SPHE and you get it because you've got a bit of time in your timetable, you're probably going to end up getting the students to do maths. And you might be as well too, because you probably don't want to get into a situation where you open up conversations that you can't hold safely. So it's not just the fear of the outside. Teachers do have to be really well supported to open up these conversations so that children and young adolescents and young adults are safe in those conversations. They're not invited to have the conversation and then left vulnerable. So it's actually a very specialised and specific skill facilitating that class.
Anya?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is when you're talking about English and geography and history, you don't have to worry about the values of the family and the beliefs of the family when you're discussing those subjects generally. But as well as that, teachers all bring their own personal experiences, their own sexualization and their own sexual lives to, they can't leave that at the door. They are impacted by what's happened to them, and not just about the big talk or small talk, but everything that's happened in their lives about this. So that makes that conversation and that CPD and the support and everything much more complex, because the teacher is sitting there with their own experiences of this, and it goes way beyond a normal subject. So I think there is a lot of supports that need to be there generally for teachers, but also some teachers more specifically who might have their own complex relationship in this area as well.
Nicola, I was really interested in those two graphs that you had, and that, at the top there was a certain percentage of people who were of kids who are getting no sexual health information anywhere. Someone has asked, how do we reach the hard to reach parents? Do we have a strategy as to, the people who say, that's not for me, I'm not going to talk about that, I'm just not comfortable in that space? The more stereotype or traditional stereotype of parenting from the olden days that still exists, I suppose, in some areas and in some people. How do we reach the hard to reach parents?
It's a great question. And I think today is quite generic. It's about talking to all parents. It's almost a public health response. It's how do we reach the entire population? But you're right, we do need to drill down into the harder to reach groups, the more vulnerable groups perhaps. And surprisingly, rural fathers in particular seem to be really struggling. But they're not the only group. I mean, there are specific issues probably for specific groups. like parents of children with disabilities, or sexual minorities, new migrants, all of these groups. So I suppose one way is to think organisationally, to go to those organisations who have access to those parents to distribute specific tools. And it's something we certainly think about. Everything that's in this research summary and within the booklets are helpful for all parents, but there might be specific issues for the individuals. So how can we, as well as an organisation, target them in the right way? And I think that partnership approach, getting into the right groups, because we certainly can't pick up the phone and talk to all rural fathers, but there might be other people who can. And it's about getting everybody involved, primary care, the medical system, the whole works, the education system. I think, again, it is quite a fragmented system, but it doesn't have to be.
Anya?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, we need to connect with the challenges that those parents have rather than the challenges we perceive them as having. So we're quite a homogenous group here. When I look out, I see people that look like myself and probably come from a similar background. So my ability to connect with a rural father is probably zero. So I need to understand what a rural father's concerns are so that I can tap into the rural father's concerns rather than promote what I think his concerns should be. I think the other thing that's going to be challenging in the years to come as well is that parents are starting to feel their children have access to so much information. They're getting information from everywhere, and actually are they competent enough to have those conversations with the children? Do children not know more than them at this stage because they're at an exploratory stage of life where parents are more at an established stage of life? So I think we need to worry that a little bit that that group might become larger because they'll step back and say, well, there's so many places for information for young people that they're already engaged in. If I start talking to them, they'll just laugh at me because what do I know? Yeah. So I think we need to start placing parents' role within this area very clearly as that kind of supportive, conversational, all the things we talked about, that relationship, communication piece that young people need from their parents rather than experts on a topic.
Yeah, a few comments from the tables. One says parents are on a learning journey with their children. Another says videos look great, very easily digestible. And then someone else says RSE for parents could be integrated into school RSE, make it about the school community. I mean, while the books are great and the videos are really useful, are there plans to integrate any type of RSE education for parents, or have events where parents can perhaps upskill in the sort of things that we're talking about here, Moira?
Well, at the moment, and for quite a long time, the HSE has funded, as I was saying, the IFPA and the National Parents Council to actually provide workshops and training courses for parents. And I know lots of schools actually provide similar, and would actually invite parents in, not just send them the letter, but invite parents in and have an evening and have a conversation. And sometimes they find parents don't turn up.
Yeah.
Because if it's in the culture that parents don't come into the school or come into the school when it's a problem, then the first kind of connection isn't going to be to invite them to something that's even scarier.
Yeah.
So yes, we need to find more ways to engage with parents. And I think what Nicola's saying, what Anya is saying, is to actually work with organisations, many of whom are here today, that actually work with those parents in the first place, that have that ongoing relationship, so that these courses or conversations with parents don't just happen in a school setting, they happen in the local family resource centre, and they happen in other courses that parents are doing as part of it, rather than as the core, which can be a bit off-putting.
Angelica, we kind of touched on this a bit, Angelica, but I haven't really heard your thoughts on it. So it seems that women young women tend to get messages regarding risk, and young men really tend to get very little information around relationships and sexual education. How do we make sure everybody gets the correct supportive education for them that also bears in mind the empathetic importance of understanding what's going on with the people who are not of their gender of that age?
Well, pardon, sorry, my voice is gone. I think, to be honest, it starts with having an honest conversation with ourselves. And I think when we're talking about risk particularly, as I think it was kind of mentioned earlier, about teachers being scared, I think sometimes parents can be scared because resources like this are really important, but when we're talking about, sexual health and well-being in relationships, there's also a negative side there that's important to warn young people, particularly young men and young women, about, so they can have healthy relationships. It's, the abuse that can happen inside and outside of relationships, and with specific regard to, I suppose, sexuality. There's horrible crimes that are committed all the time, and you mentioned it earlier. How do you tell your children about this? It comes back to having to support the teachers and the parents, because you can't necessarily expect a parent to be able to tell their children about that if that's something they've gone through and they don't have the support for. So it is a very, very difficult conversation to have, but it's important that we give the same information to everybody, because in the same way we're talking about sexual violence, it can predominantly affect women. It's also important that we teach our young men that that's wrong, because the majority of sexual violence committed against women is committed by males, and the best way to address something, I think we all know in this room, is education. Even the words of Malala Yousafzai, one book, one pen, it can change the world, and education is the most powerful tool we have. So when it comes to sexual health, relationships, anything, it's important that we say, yes, it's great, you can have pleasure, but on the other hand of it, there can also be abuse, but how do you address that? And I think there's people in the room who are doing great work on that subject, but I think it's important to address it.
Darius?
Yeah, I totally agree with Angelica there. We need to educate young men and provide them the information they need to be respectful, be considerate, and it's a really important subject.
Yeah, I mean, consent is obviously a really big discussion point at the moment. I think rightly so. It's great to hear that being a dominant theme in the conversations we're having with young men. And it does need to be part of this education that we're talking about. So let's finish off by getting from each of you the answer to this question, which is, do you think we'll ever get to a time where parents and their children can just talk about sex in a way that is never awkward at all? Do you think that's ever going to happen, Darius?
Well, there's constantly going to be some awkwardness, but it's about continuously making it less embarrassing, just talking to each other, being more honest. It's a gradual thing that might just ebb and flow, but we need to keep at it. If we don't keep at it, we're going to go back down to maybe like 100 years ago, where nobody talked about it nearly.
Well, I mean, you laugh about it, but in America you see polarization of views, and having read Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, there's echoes of what's going on in some parts of America, which can really terrifying. We're not immune to all that, so thanks, Darius. Angelica, do you think we'll ever get to the stage where we're just hunky-dory talking about vulvas and penises and
Well, I hope so. I'm not going to be overly optimistic. This will not happen overnight. This probably won't happen during my lifetime, because the way change happens is through generations. Because when you're teaching, say, our children, and we're teaching them, that's a penis, that's a vulva, it's actually not a vagina, that's inside, it's not outside, then those children can teach their children. And when they grow up without that stigma around it, that's when we can really see that change. And it might take a while for Ireland, but across the world, in countries that are a little bit more liberal and progressive than we are, the likes of, say, the Netherlands, and particularly in the Scandinavian countries, it is possible. And I think by using these resources, it's definitely possible, and it's a really good first step, because we all know change doesn't happen overnight, and it's up to parents, it's up to children, it's up to teachers to all collectively work together. I think that's the message we're all getting.
Anya?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with a lot with Angelica's optimism, because I think we've come a long way already. And I think the fact that we're having a conversation like this here now is optimistic. But I do think there'll always be an element, because we're talking about personal relationships. So whether you're talking about sexual relationships or non-sexual personal relationships, there's always an element of privacy about. So I don't think we're going to ever get to talk about personal relationships with everybody at any time in whichever way we want to, because I don't know whether that's appropriate and what we want. But I think in terms of being more open about sexual relationships and relationships in general, I think we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go, but I would be equally optimistic about it, yes.
Nicola?
Yeah, I'd share that optimism as well, because my grandmother is 100 years old and she had an entirely different experience. My own mother has totally different attitudes, totally different experiences than I did. And when I look at younger people now, I'm so impressed by how engaged, interested, questioning, they don't take the status quo for granted. And if we look in Ireland at the last 10 years, all of the legislative change, it is vast. And I think if we think about society as a whole, once you open the doors, once the floodgates open, you can't go back. We're not going to go back, I don't think. I mean, yes, we can look at the US as an example, but I think the gates of liberalisation have opened and it's going to be difficult for anyone to shut them. So I'd have high hopes for the future.
As a bleeding heart liberal, I hope you're right, but as I say, watching what's going on at times makes you wonder. Moira, we've had optimism all the way. A bit of pessimism from you, please.
Sorry, Jonathan. No. I share the optimism. I absolutely agree that it will take time. And I think, when Nicola was saying that, we're starting with kind of the public health approach, which is kind of broad and all that, it's really hard to expect people, the rural fathers or, maybe other parents who find this additionally difficult, possibly additionally difficult, for them to be at the vanguard. We need to create the environment. When we talk in health promotion, that's my background in terms of health promotion. We talk about making the environment hospitable to people making healthy choices. It is very hard for people to make those choices if the environment is hostile around them. So it's our job, everybody here, and all the people we work with and all the people we engage with, it's our job to make the environment hospitable to parents having those conversations, not to blame them, not to push them further than they can go at a particular time, but to work with them incrementally to do it. And just to say to you, I come from a fairly conservative background myself, and working in this area, you get so normalized around the language. I was having breakfast this morning in the hotel. Keith and myself were having breakfast. Sheila Wayman in The Times did an article on the resources this morning, and we were trying to look at it on our phones, and one of the headings was, and I was just, Kiva had just gone to get something to eat, and I was just about to say, oh look, Anya Lynch said,
God, what did I say?
just call a penis penis. And then I thought, oh no, I can't shout that across the hotel room. So just to say to you, the habit, it comes with habit. It does get easier. So we talk about making the big talk many small talks, the little steps add to the big steps. Just have a go. And can I just say one more thing? In the HSC, we have a program, sexual health program, called the Foundation Program of Sexual Health Promotion. If you're a professional, if you work in education, health, community, youth work, you're eligible. It's a 6-day program. It's funded by the HSE. And I was just talking to somebody who's in the room who said it was the best program she had ever done. So that's real endorsement. But what it is, it's a safe space for professionals to explore their own attitudes and values to prepare them to do the work. So like Anya said, teachers need that space. They need to be able to process their own stuff so they can work with parents. Loads of professionals do, and the HSE has a program to support you.
Brilliant.